Good morning, everybody. We are just logging in here. Thank you again, everybody, for joining us today at Mature Market Sales Source. For those of you who have not experienced our webinar before, we're an online sales training and consulting firm dedicated to advancing the quality of senior housing sales and marketing. We have people from all over the country. We have California, we have Maine, we have New York, Ohio, Oregon, just about any state. So we've pretty much got a full house today, and we're really glad that you're here. My name is Dina Nesty. I'm a co-founder here at Mature Market Sales Source. I'll be hosting today as we have a guest expert presenter, Mr. Chris Rohde from SeniorHomes.com.
Hi, Dina. Hello,
Hi,
everyone.
Chris. How are you?
Good.
This topic has been a huge topic, something we've been talking about quite a bit at Mature Market Sales Source, and that is the major uptick in the amount of internet leads as becoming almost a primary source for new inquiries coming into senior living and senior services. And Chris and I met about a year ago at an Alpha conference, and we were talking a lot about just, the quality of leads and things that were coming in and some of the frustration with regards to, people making a lot of contacts to leads, but not, or new inquiries, but not necessarily getting a big response from them. And so we've been talking over the last couple of months, especially as we've been seeing the number of internet inquiries increasing out there in our industry, about some of the ways to, number one, drive those leads to your communities, but to, get in contact with them. What processes and protocols and things do you need to have in place to maximize your results from this wonderful source of leads? Chris is a co-founder and CEO at SeniorHomes.com. And Senior Homes is, for those of you who do not know, it's an internet inquiry company where they have customers who basically subscribe or contract with them to bring qualified leads to their communities. Chris brings over 15 years experience leading teams with technology, and together with Jay Goldstein, they founded Senior Homes about 2.5 years ago. And they saw a need out there that still, really hadn't been quite met yet. And, really bringing qualified leads, helping the consumer, get the information that they're looking for and narrow it down so that they could be contacted by people that really could already meet their needs. I'd like to share just a really quick little fun story. Chris lives in Seattle, Washington with his wife and 2 kids, and they enjoy the outdoors and trying to keep active. But Chris was sharing a very interesting story with me about how he decided, for fun, that he would follow in his father's footsteps to coach soccer, and decided he was going to coach his son's soccer team. The only problem is when he started coaching, he realized that he was probably the weakest soccer player out there when he was a child. And now the roles are reversed, where his son is a little bit embarrassed of his soccer skills. So we know that he's got a lot more skills in the technology side of the business. So we're excited to hear a little bit more about what Chris really excels at. So welcome, Chris. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks a lot, Dina. So let's first talk about why internet inquiries are important. Think about your target customer. Depending upon the specialization of your communities, it's either a 55-year-old woman looking for housing or care for her mother, or a senior themselves looking for independent living, or both. The 55-year-old woman of 10 years ago went to the Yellow Pages for information, but now the Yellow Pages most often ends up in the trash. The 55-year-old woman of today is going straight to the internet anytime she's looking for anything. So the internet is really the go-to place for information about senior care and senior housing. And as well, we know that internet inquiries are a growing source of leads for providers. So let's look at some data. This is showing the internet usage of baby boomers. You can see here that basically 80% of baby boomers use the internet at least once per month. This here shows the internet usage of seniors, people age 65 or more. And you can see here that 47% today of seniors use the internet at least once per month, And this is actually projected to grow to around 56% by 2015. One more data point, and this one actually surprised me, is the average number of hours spent online per month cut by different age groups. And I think what was really interesting here is that the baby boomers, or part of the baby boomer segment, that 45 to 54-year-old segment, actually spends more time online than any other age demographic. And in fact, the 65-year-old segment spends more time online than 18 to 24-year-olds. I was kind of blown away by that. So your target audience, the target audience you're trying to reach, is one of the most engaged audiences online. So here we're showing the results of the survey that we ran when you registered for this webcast. This shows the percent of inquiries that are coming from the internet. And you can see here that 25% of you said that greater than 40% of your leads are coming from internet sources. And if you add up the numbers, you'll see that around 70% said that internet inquiries accounted for more than 16% of your total inquiries. Do you have anything more to add here, Dina?
Well, it's an interesting statistic because we have just been doing some survey or collecting some survey data on this. We did a small sampling. It started in early July, and we've just opened up the survey probably about a week or two ago to pretty much anybody who wants to participate. And what prompted this was an article that was in the Alpha Assisted Living Executive magazine. And for those of you who have not seen it, it's in the March-April issue. It's called Chasing Leads. And they had a focus group where there were about 5 senior living sales and marketing professionals there. And they were talking about just the major shift in where their leads were coming from. And all of them had reported about 35% of their leads were now coming from the internet, including various sources, which I know that you're going to kind of address, Chris. But it just kind of floored me. I had no idea that it had gotten that large. So we decided to kind of go out and look at that data ourselves and see if, was this just this unique set of providers, or was this really happening out there? And we really are finding, although not everybody's at that 35% or more, what we found was over 12 months, Chris, which was just astounding to us, that in the last probably 6 months, internet inquiries have increased by about 25% to just about everybody in our survey group. So just that alone was an amazing statistic.
Wow. Yeah, I know we've talked earlier about, just a couple of years ago, internet inquiries were, typically less than 10 or 15% of people's leads. So that's really a big change.
It's huge.
So here we are. So today we're going to talk about the 7 ways to get the most out of your internet inquiries. We'll talk about how to maximize inquiries of your own from your website, how to select a few quality internet inquiry vendors. We'll talk a bit about how to respond to internet inquiries. First, respond quickly. Second, have really diligent follow-up. And third, don't judge a book by its cover. Next, we'll talk about the technology and systems that are key to have in place to really kind of maximize your efforts. And finally, we'll talk about how to track your results and compare them based on a cost per move-in basis. So let's first talk about your own website and online marketing efforts. There's a segment of prospects out there that already know about your community or brand. Now, these could be people that have heard great things from a friend or a relative who has a parent in your community, or these could be people that live nearby and have been driving past your community for years. The folks that know you and are searching for you are the best prospects and will convert at the highest rate. And these are who your website should target. Your internet presence, your website and other places like Facebook really should be designed to maximize the inquiries from this target segment. And there's really 2 ways to optimize your online marketing to reach these people. The first starts with your website, and you want to make sure that your website's really easy to navigate, and most importantly, you want to remove any barriers to people reaching you, to people contacting you and taking action once they come to your website. We'll look at a couple examples there. And then the second is to really maximize the exposure that you're getting on the web through your website and through Facebook. So let's look at a couple examples. So I did a search. I picked a random city and did a search for assisted living in Google for that city. And this was the very first site that came up. I've anonymized it so that, if you happen to be on the call, the person that owns this site, you won't feel bad. But what, I thought was interesting about this site is that, at first glance, you might think it's a pretty nicely designed site. It's got decent pictures and some nice text. But what's missing here is there's really no call to action. Site visitors need to be told what to do next, and visitors to this site are likely not to take any action because the site isn't telling them to do so. And there's nothing that really stands out here. So there's a good chance that a lot of the visitors to this site will just move on without contacting this provider at all, and the provider is going to miss their opportunity at a good inquiry. So let's look at one more example. This compare this website to the last one. And what's the first thing you look at here? And where's your eye drawn? Personally, I'm first drawn to the pictures because they're sort of, nice, bright pictures. But then kind of immediately after that, I'm drawn to the three buttons that say explore other benchmark communities, schedule a tour, or request information. Benchmark Senior Living, the company that operates this community, has done a great job of telling me as a web visitor what to do next. And I know actually that they're using G5 as their platform for this site. G5 helps companies build websites. So, again, what they're doing here is they're guiding me through the site, directing me down the path they want me to take. I don't even have to think about what to do next because, they're drawing me down that path. So as you think about your own website, you need to think about, every single page on that website. It should have a purpose and a specific call to action for the visitor. Now that call to action might vary from page to page, but ultimately you want to remove the barriers for them to contact you. So for example, you want to have the phone number and an email address and some way to contact you on every page, even if that's not the primary call to action. One last example, here's another site I thought was a good example. Again, I look first at the pictures here, and but then I'm kind of drawn down to the lower right to this little orange button that says Call Now. And I picked this example because I thought it was great because it demonstrates that you don't actually need to be sort of overly, you don't need to overly emphasize your call to action. Sometimes it just needs to be something small that stands out above the rest. So the points with your website are to keep things simple and make sure that every page has at least one call to action. So once you've made sure that your own website has clear calls to action, you want to try to get maximum exposure for that site. Now, I'm not going to go into too much depth here because the topic of online marketing is something that we could probably spend an entire week seminar on to really do it justice, but I'll cover a few brief points. First, you want to make sure that your site's optimized for the search engines. There are some simple things you can do yourself, but this is a pretty complicated and deep area. And so really, if you want to get great results, the best thing to do is likely to hire a consultant or agency to help you with this. Next, you want to bid on some keywords in Google and the other search engines. This is called SEM for those of you that don't know. Setting up your own campaigns is actually fairly easy. But again, if you don't know where to start, there are plenty of people out there to help you get going. And one thing I would say about that is you can actually hire an agency to get you up and running. And once you have a campaign running, it doesn't take a lot of work to keep it going, as long as it's set up and optimized. One other important thing is to register with Google Places. Google Places gives you top billing on the search engines, and this image here shows Google Places results. So if you look at those little red bubbles, the A, B, C, D, that sort of correspond to the map on the right, those are the Google Places results, and you can see that those get really top billing in the organic search results in Google. And as a community or as a portfolio of communities, you can register your communities in Google Places and get great exposure. Finally, everyone knows that how big Facebook has become and how much time people are spending there. It's really important to engage there. It's a great way to, by putting up a Facebook page, it's a great way to show some of the more unique and personal side of your community through pictures and comments you can post there.
Chris, this is Dina.
Sure.
Are there other social networking places that you would recommend besides Facebook that you spend some time?
That's a really good question. We have a Twitter account, and we're pretty active in Twitter. But I think actually for most providers and communities, the other social networks are not going to be as important. Our Twitter usage is really to reach out to the industry, and consumer usage of Twitter is just not nearly as broad as Facebook and Google. So it's a good place to do PR. It's a good place to reach out to industry contacts. But in terms of reaching consumers, Facebook is really where it's at.
Great, thanks.
Sure. So why engage with internet inquiry vendors? Reaching beyond your own marketing efforts and engaging with internet inquiry vendors gives your company exposure to a much broader audience. Your own marketing efforts will expose your community or your communities to a certain segment of people. But when you work with vendors, you'll get great leverage to get exposure to a much broader group of people. You'll get leads and move-ins that you never would have reached through your own efforts. Now, you don't necessarily need to work with 5 vendors. I'm not suggesting there's a perfect number here. But you should at least test 2 or 3 and see which ones work the best for you. One of the first things you'll have to consider when selecting an internet inquiry vendor is the type of contract that they offer. There's 3 basic types of contracts: pay-per-referral, pay-per-lead, or subscription. Pay-per-referral, I'm sure everyone's familiar with. These are contracts where you pay anywhere from 50 to 100% of the first month's rent and care fees. Pay-per-lead contracts are where you pay for every lead the vendor sends you. And subscription contracts are where you pay a flat fee for, a month or a quarter or a year. Now, some of the differences here. Pay-per-referral is going to give you a very predictable cost per move-in because it's essentially set based on the, cost of your rent and care fees. But this can be really expensive. With pay-per-lead, the cost per move-in is dependent on the quality of the vendor and the quality of the leads that the vendor sends you. When I talk about lead quality, what I mean is, and we'll talk a lot more about this in a bit, how many leads convert to move-ins. With highly qualified leads, you'll have a higher conversion rate and thus a lower cost per move-in. And this is something you'll hear me talk about a lot. Finally, with a subscription contract, the cost per move-in is going to be dependent upon both the lead quality and also the lead quantity. One of the problems with subscription contracts is that you simply don't know how many leads you'll get, and this can be a bit of a risk. Seniorhomes.com, we're a pay-per-lead vendor. So lead quality is really the most important factor when you're looking at internet lead vendors because of its impact on cost per move-in. And there's a few questions you can ask to get a gauge on quality. Where are the leads coming from? what's the consumer experience and how are the leads filtered, and how many other communities will get the same lead. And we'll talk a bit more about these. So one of the first questions to ask is, where does the internet inquiry vendor you're talking to, where does the traffic to their website come from, and where do the leads they're sending you come from? Because lead quality can vary greatly based on the type of traffic a vendor gets to their own site, as well as where they are generating other sources of leads. Traffic from search tends to be higher quality from the search engines, which means that leads coming from search traffic will convert at a higher rate to move in. Other sources of traffic, like email marketing, display advertising, and other sources, they can be good if the right filters are in place, but these sources can also be low converting. One of the sources of leads that's notoriously low quality are affiliate leads. And I want to show you how affiliates work, because I don't think a lot of people understand this. So you might sign a contract with a lead vendor and think all of your leads are coming from the lead vendor's own website. But in reality, the vendor might have contracted with a network of other websites and email marketing companies to send them leads. These are called affiliates. And these websites may contract with other sites to drive leads to them. So one of the risks with affiliates is you really lose a lot of control. A couple of the problems are that affiliates are much less likely to care about lead quality than someone who has direct contact with you and knows you. They don't know you, they don't know your business, and many affiliates are notorious for acting with their short-term interest in mind. The second problem with affiliates is that you lose control of your brand. You have no control of how that affiliate 7 way out there on the right will present your community. In fact, you don't even know what kind of site affiliate 7 is. It all happens behind a curtain. So it's really key when you're talking to a lead vendor, when you're talking to existing ones you're working with, or ones you're considering taking on as a new vendor, that you ask things like, do you use affiliate networks? And if so, what % of your leads come from affiliate networks? And what % of your leads come from email marketing, from search marketing, et cetera? And with all this, you'll have a much clearer sense of what you're buying. Just to share some of our stats, seniorhomes.com, most of our traffic comes from search marketing, roughly around 85%, which, as I said, is typically the highest quality traffic source. And the other 15% comes from people that come to our site directly. So the next question to ask when selecting a vendor is, what is the consumer experience? And also you want to understand, how are the leads filtered? We talked about removing barriers for people contacting you when you're designing your own website. Now, in fact, the opposite is true when you're working with a lead vendor. Because when you're working with an internet inquiry vendor, you actually want them to put up barriers or filters on their site so that the leads that come through to you are more highly qualified. So, for example, on your own website, you might not want to put prices there so that you sort of maximize the number of leads that come through your site. But when working with a vendor, posting a price is super important to make sure that the leads that you receive are well qualified. You can see that we do that here. We have a requirements box on our site that shows the minimum monthly cost of the particular community. And we can also add other things like, if you have a minimum age or if there's an entrance fee. These are things that we sort of put up front and center so that people that can't afford your site or aren't the right age won't ever inquire. Now, you also want to ask about what other things the vendor's doing to filter the leads before they get to you. And I'll tell you about some of the things we do so you can understand this. We actually manually review every lead that comes through, and then we call every lead 3 days after it's generated to further qualify that lead. And as a result, we end up filtering most of the lower quality leads and let the good ones go through. So when looking at a new vendor, make sure you know what the user experience is on the site, understand it, and understand what the vendor is doing behind the scenes to filter out the bad leads. So one last question to ask is, how many other communities are getting the same inquiry that I'm getting? At seniorhomes.com, this is a metric we track, and we call this inquiries per inquirer, or IPI. And here's how IPI works. If on average, every lead is only going to one community, this would be an IPI of 1. If on average, across all the leads you get from a vendor, that inquiry is also going to 2 other communities in addition to yours, that would be an IPI of 3. If it's going to 6 communities, that's an IPI of 6, and so on. The reason IPI is so important is because the higher the IPI, the lower the conversion rate from lead to move-in. So with a higher IPI, you're competing with more companies to get the attention of the user, and your conversion rates will be lower. Now, it's not actually a bad thing for consumers to visit multiple communities. They really should. I mean, this is a good thing because, you want to make sure it's a good fit. The consumer wants to make sure it's a good fit. But, in the cases where a vendor is sending an inquiry that's sent to 12 communities, that's really a bad experience for everyone. Again, I'll just share our internal data. Our IPI across all of our leads averages around 2.3, and we know this works out well for our customers.
Chris, do you have a statistic? What, in general, what would be a good benchmark for people to say, okay, this is an acceptable number, but this is not an acceptable number?
Well, that's a great question. I think, the way to think about that is to think about what ideally, as a consumer, what should the consumer experience be? I mean, do consumers really don't need to visit typically 12 communities to make a decision? They can do some research online, pick out the top 2 or 3, and tour those. And so, that's really how to think about this.
Well, it's a little interesting because I know I shared this story with you a couple days ago, but I was recently helping somebody whose mom needed some level of senior care. They were looking at both home care or assisted living. And it was a market in Phoenix that I didn't know very well. So I thought, well, I'm going to do a little online research myself before I start helping to make some, recommendations for this friend. And so I went to a couple of the sites. If you Google out there, and of course the first things that come up are always going to be, usually are going to be the search companies, like yourself. So I said, well, you know what, this might help narrow some things down. So I chose 2, and I won't say who I chose. But I will say from one company in particular, I probably got 12 calls, both from the communities and from, the vendor themselves. And it was, to some degree, just a little bit annoying. I thought, well, how does somebody keep up with all of this? And I honestly, I have to say, this was not because I knew this program was happening. It really shocked me because I was almost afraid to answer my phone during the day because I was getting inundated by tons and tons of calls. And, I was expecting calls. I was expecting emails from people, telling me about their services. I guess I was just floored by the actual number of people that called me and found it to be very difficult.
Yeah, I mean, that we know that happens, and it's not a great experience for either the consumer or the providers, because from the provider standpoint, they're, if you're the 8th person that's called the consumer, you might catch someone that's got really frustrated and
highly annoyed,
angry. That's right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so until you and I were kind of reviewing this, I had no idea how this actually worked, and it all started to come together about my most recent personal experience. And for those of you on the call, it might just be even interesting to try it sometime, just on your own, to go and kind of see what kind of results you get if you're trying to search for an assisted living or service provider somewhere out there.
Yep. Okay, so let's move on and talk about some key things after you've set up your own website and contracted with a couple of internet inquiry vendors. One thing that's unique about internet inquiries is that, the number one most important thing is to follow up quickly. We know that people on the web want immediacy. They want a quick response. We had an example early on. This is, in our first year of operations. We had one community that signed up with us, and within 3 months, they had received 15 leads. And out of those 15 leads had 3 move-ins, which is a 20% conversion rate, which they were very happy about. So when we heard this, we actually picked up the phone and called the CRD at the community and asked him, "What are you doing? What's your secret sauce?" And he said, "All I do is I just pick up I call the leads immediately. When I see it come in, I try to get on the phone as quickly as possible." And there was really nothing beyond special he was doing beyond that. And we've had other customers tell us the same thing. So it's really important to call the inquiries right away.
I think the old adage is that if a lead becomes 50% less hot, about 2 hours after it actually comes in, and I think to your point here, Chris, when I'm researching, one of the reasons I research things on the internet is so I can get immediate information. And clearly you can get some information when people are looking for senior services, but you still need to wait to hear back from providers. When you're wanting to get that detailed information, and the longer you wait, the less interest becomes. So that's, I think that's such a critical point, that just because it came in on the internet does not mean it's not a hot lead.
Yeah. Yeah. So next, working with internet inquiries, it's really important to be diligent about your follow-up. And we wanted to do a quick poll here.
We wanted to kind of find out just what people, what your perception is with regards to follow-up. So I'm going to go ahead. You'll see a quick little poll come up on your screen. If you quickly select your answer and send it back, we'll see what people think out there. But what we wanted to know was, on average, how many people or how many times would you attempt to contact somebody? Was it, 2 times? Was it 5 times? Was it greater than 5 times? Or you just keep contacting them until till the cows come home? What would be the average time you would contact somebody before you give up?
We actually have some experience in this. We've spent a couple of years sort of refining our own process. We follow up with all the leads that come through. And at this point, we actually contact every person at least 5 times. And those contacts include at least one call during the midweek, during the evening when people are home, and then at least one contact during the weekend. And if we don't reach them after 5 calls, we actually send a kind of a closing email, one last ditch effort over email. And with this level of effort, we end up reaching basically around 90% of our leads, and then we end up, of course, closing 10% of those as unreachable, which we think is a pretty good percent.
So basically, at least 5 attempts at different hours would be
That's right.
a good rule of thumb on leads, on internet leads. Okay.
So one last key point about internet inquiries is to not judge a book by its cover. Sometimes a lead comes in that initially looks bad, but they can turn into a move-in. We got this lead last December, which of course looked fishy, with the first name and last name of LKLK. And, as a part of our regular sort of lead review, one of our care advisors reviewed this lead and noticed this funny name, called this person immediately to see if it was a bad lead. Within 2 phone calls, she ended up getting the person's real name and forwarded this along to the community. And a month later, this person moved into the Bridgewood at 4 Seasons. So it's good to remember that sometimes, even if the lead has no comments, or if it looks weak and has a funny name or a fake-looking email, it might be a gem. But at the same time, you got to prioritize your efforts. So if you try once or twice to reach a lead like this and you can't get through, leave these ones behind and go focus on the ones that show more promise. So next, we wanted to talk about the process and technology that is good to have in place to sort of maximize your efforts in working with internet inquiries. The first of these is to have consistent process and protocols. Dina, do you want to jump in and make some points on this?
Sure. Again, some really basic stuff here, but the more people I talk to, the more that I realize that there isn't necessarily consistent process and protocol for dealing with internet leads. And going back to that thought in mind that when people inquire over the internet, a lot of people are looking for instant gratification, just as we are when we're out there doing our research, especially in the evening. So number one, making sure that each community or each location has an expectation for a response time to each internet inquiry. Everybody's responded, if it's normal business hours, within 1 to 2 hours. But in order to do that, there has to be a chain of command. So if there is a sales or marketing representative in that community, what do they do when they're on a tour out of the building? So who's responsible? Setting up a chain of command within your community to check for internet leads while the salesperson is out or doing other things. Also, who's checking at night and who's checking on the weekends. Even if there's an opportunity to engage that person with we look forward to talking with you and some sort of response, even if it's an email. Sending up some standardized and customized responses. If you're not able to reach them by phone, can you reach them via the internet? Is there a personalized letter that you can create based on the form that they filled out that talks a little bit about their needs, making sure that it's not too much, you can use form letters, but please try to customize it, because that means that you've actually read what's important to them. And then protocols for contact and follow-up, like Chris just discussed. What is our, standard approach? Do we try 5 times, and we try an evening, we try a weekend, we try early morning, making sure that you do have some protocols for each lead that's out there. I think, based on various things that I've learned from Chris over the last, couple of weeks that we've been talking, when you're getting, there may be a reason people are not responding to your calls if they're getting 15 follow-up calls from various communities out there. So number one, you've got to be the first one to call them or first one to contact them. But, number two, what time of day are you trying to reach them? So make sure that there's some protocols for contact and follow-up. And Chris, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah. So one more thing that's really key when setting up, and working with internet leads is to have a lead management system in place. And this, ideally is a, customer relationship management or CRM system that has some sort of database and some reporting. But, this can be manual, but it'll take more work if you're tracking leads manually in a spreadsheet. One of the real primary benefits of having a CRM system is that you get a whole lot of reporting. You'll really be able to look at the ROI, which we'll talk about more in a minute. These reports will give you, much better insight into your sales and marketing efforts and help you to optimize your budget. And finally, one last thing that some people may not know about is it's important, if you do have a CRM system, is to set up something called form posting with all of the internet inquiry vendors you work with. Form posting is essentially when the vendor system is able to post leads directly into your system via the internet. The alternative, if you're not doing this, which is actually what most of our customers are still doing, is to receive the leads via email. Now, the problem with getting leads via email is it's much harder to track and manage the leads and much harder to report what's happening. If you get a lead via email, essentially somebody then has to manually enter that lead into a spreadsheet or into your CRM system. It's much better if those things are going in there automatically. And what I'm showing here in this chart is what happened with 2 of our customers when we moved from sending leads via email to form posting directly to their database. You can see in both these cases, before we were form posting, we were losing. We'd go back and we'd do a review with the customer and say, here's how many leads we sent you. And they'd say, well, here's how many leads we actually have in our system. And we had these huge loss rates because many of the leads weren't even getting in there. But you can see what happened after. All those leads end up getting in there, and it's much, much more clean to track. So that's a key thing. The last point we want to make is about tracking the ROI across all of your lead sources. And you can really, I've shown all these are all online sources. You can even include offline sources as well. And so what I'm showing here is an example company that has 8 communities and summarize their results across 6 months. You can see that they're getting leads from their own efforts, their own website, from 1 subscription vendor, 2 pay-per-lead vendors, and a referral source. And in this example, you can see that they've spent around $12,000 driving leads from their own site, and that generated 640 inquiries. With the subscription vendor, they're spending $100 per community per month for a total cost across the 6 months of $4,800, and they got 96 inquiries. With the 2 pay-per-lead vendors, there's 2 different prices there. You can see that the first vendor drove 160 inquiries, and the second sent 417, and you can see the corresponding cost there. And then to calculate that, it's just simply, the 45 times the 160. That gets you to the total cost of $7,200. And for the referral source, they're paying out 100% of the first month's rent and care fees. And from this referral source, they got 224 inquiries, and they ended up paying move-in fees or referral fees of $14,000. Now, this is just part of the story. The most important thing to look at here is how many move-ins did they get, what was the conversion rate, and ultimately what was the cost per move-in. So you can see the column with the move-in shows the move-ins that this company got from each source. You can see that they got 36 move-ins from their own website, and then they got 19 move-ins from the 3 or 4 different sources they were working with. So so they did get a substantial portion of their move-ins. The conversion rate is calculated simply by dividing the move-ins by the number of inquiries, and you can compare this across vendors. But the most important thing to look at here, which I've mentioned numerous times, is to look at that cost per move-in, and that's calculated by simply dividing the total cost for that source for this, for the period of time you're measuring by the number of move-ins. So in this case, I just divided in terms of, say, the referral source, or I divided the 14,400 by 6 to get to 3,200. So, what you can, the takeaway here is, once you've figured out the cost per move-in, you can really understand the ROI across the different sources of leads and the different, marketing channels you've implemented. And then you can make optimizations to optimize your budget and maximize the return on the spending you're doing. Now, of course, in this example, the most obvious question is what to do with the pay-per-lead vendor number 2 with a cost per move-in of over $4,000. So these are the results of the survey we gave during the registration around, the percent of internet inquiries that convert to move-in. And this is what you guys all told us. So it looks like, roughly 40% of you, or 38%, said that your internet inquiries are converting at less than 5%, and 42% said that your inquiries were converting at between 6 and 15%. So, these are pretty good results.
How about those people? How about those people over 35%? Love to talk to those. We were real honest on the survey and the results, and some of the respondents were unique in the kinds of services that they provided. That may have drove some of that up a little bit, but it's definitely telling. But it also shows that there's a lot of room to improve. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier in the program about some of the data that we've been collecting, truly the key to the results here is getting them in for a tour. So you've got to, somehow get engaged with them on the phone or online and compel that lead to come in and meet with you and have an appointment or do a tour, because you simply can't close online, and it's very difficult to close on the phone as well unless you're unbelievably talented. But what we did find, the one thing that we are finding with the data that's coming in, is that the benchmark from inquiry to close, I should say inquiry to move in or inquiry to close, is a lot lower for an internet lead at this point. But if you can actually get somebody in for a tour or an appointment, those numbers become very consistent with other closing ratios. So again, obviously, if you've qualified them and you have a service that meets that individual's needs, you have an opportunity to close that lead just as any other source, friends or family, professional referrals, whatever sources that are out there. So so the key clearly is engaging them and getting them to come in and meet with you. Chris?
Yep. I think we're going to move on to questions now.
Yeah, that's basically kind of covers it. We've had several questions coming in, and we'd love to. You can, if you don't have a question, you can also send us a comment about any of the statistics that we shared. One question again, Chris, I'd like to ask is what. You had said that typically of the leads that Senior Homes provides, what is the percentage of closing on those or that convert into a move-in or a sale?
Into a move-in. Mm-hmm. So, the quality of our leads is actually fairly consistent from customer to customer, and, the variability often comes in really how they handle the leads mm-hmm. and their own processes. And so we typically see a range anywhere from, say, 2.5%, to 6 or 7%, and as you saw, we've seen plenty of examples, far above that, where a certain community is just has a unique location or maybe a unique offering, and does a great job with follow up, and so we sometimes see, as I showed, 20% conversion rates, but those tend to be less common, but that's typically the range, 2.5 to 6 or 7%. Mm-hmm. And with that, we end up having a much lower cost per move-in on a relative basis, when you compare us to, say, a typical referral source where you're paying 100% of that first month's rent and care fees.
Gotcha. And then have you, kind of gone out to some of your clients that are doing a good job of closing? Do they, besides that diligent follow-up, anything that they're doing like, to get them to come in for a tour? Is there anything that they're doing, engaging them to create that urgency, to get them to pick them over the other 5 communities that are contacting them?
Yeah, I think it boils down to mostly what we talked about, respond quickly, be diligent. I think, it's also important to know what's unique about your community and be able to share that. One other thing we hear that companies doing that do really well is they'll find something personal about that person that's coming in and make sure that the tour they give really meets the needs of that specific person, because everyone's got their own sort of hot buttons and things that they really are interested in, and if you can sort of speak to those things, that really helps.
Great. Julie is asking, you had mentioned that you personally, or not you, but Senior Homes actually follows up with the internet inquiries that come in that get passed on to a client. What are you hearing from them in terms of their experience? Are they being contacted? Are they happy with their contact experience? What are you learning from those leads that you follow up with?
That's a great question. We typically, in that call, what we're trying to do is say, for the consumer, we're calling them to say, hey, we wanted to see how the experience went and to see if we can give you more help. And we also, in that conversation always ask, have you heard from the communities? Now, in most cases, communities are pretty good now about follow-up. We like to think that we've actually helped with that, at least with our customers, because when we hear that they haven't followed up, we'll let the community know. Like if the consumer is saying, "Hey, I inquired 3 days ago and I haven't heard from anyone," we'll let the communities know that. We'll let the regional manager typically know that, just so they are aware that something might have slipped through the cracks. Sometimes we find that it's actually the community did try to reach out and the consumer is confused, or they didn't remember or something. But most often, I would say that companies are pretty good these days with follow up.
Great. And that's why it's so critical to have those processes and policies in place for follow-up, especially for those, that your internet leads. Nobody's going to call you up and say, "Hey, you've got internet leads sitting here." No, nobody's responded to. I've got a question here from Judy, and she would like to know what databases can accommodate the form posting that you referred to. Are there specific CRMs or?
Good question. I would say most of the ones. Let's see. We've connected to Yardi. Yardi is a CRM system out there. You've Got Leads now. I think they've opened their system up so that this is a place for mom's CRM system, and they've opened that up to other vendors to post in there. And there's a number of others. I think Vital Software allows that. There's a number of packages out there, and I think it's a pretty standard feature because it's actually not a super technical thing to do. I would say the important thing is that I think it's a bit easier if you're working with a web service, a CRM that's hosted online, as opposed to something that's on your own desktop. That might be a challenge to set up.
So would you send like a report, like if somebody doesn't have that forum posting, could you send a report to the individual community that says, "Here's all the leads we sent you," and track them with what your follow-up has been? Do you typically do that, or?
Yeah, that's a great question. So like I said, the people that we don't have a forum post relationship set up with, we send the leads via email. But at the end of the month, we also send a monthly report that shows by community, by region, by division, and by, we also have a corporate report as well that shows, here's all the leads we sent you, here's the, and some summary results as well.
Gotcha. Okay. We had another question here. Sue had asked about source tracking, and wanted to know, do you break out your sources individually from internet leads? And Chris, I'll have you respond. I know I have a response to that as well.
Yeah, I think I'm not sure I totally understand the question. I think what you're saying is, should you break out every source down sort of to the smallest source, smallest detail? And my answer to that would be certainly yes, because the more detailed you can get, the more you can optimize your marketing. So like I showed in that last slide, if you're able to look at how much you've spent with each of your lead sources, how many leads you got from that source, and how many move-ins, those are really the three pieces of data you need to figure out what your overall ROI is.
Right, absolutely. So yeah, definitely be tracking them, by paid, referral source, the types that Chris described. You want to definitely track your leads that are coming in through your own internet, your own website efforts or inbound marketing. And also another source out there that we haven't really talked about today, but is links through your local business community. So if you have a link on the Chamber of Commerce or perhaps a healthcare network or something out there, and those are also very viable ways to get found out there and have people come, or have leads or come to your website. So you want to be tracking those as well. And so
Okay.
I have a question from Matt about enhanced email marketing. We'll probably address that in a different topic or a different program, a little bit more about inbound marketing. But Chris, what are some of the things that you guys do to get found out there?
Well, like I said, right now what we primarily do is get traffic through search. so both paid search and free or organic search. And so, that's sort of where our expertise comes in. Is, we're very good at getting noticed by Google and Bing and Yahoo, and then driving traffic that way. But there's a lot of other places to find qualified traffic and people that are interested in your community. Facebook is clearly a place to try to engage. You can email marketing is a great thing to have in place. And I think the best place to start really is by building your own list. That's the least expensive. So as you get inquiries, a lot of those inquiries that you might never reach right now, put them into a database and do some sort of passive marketing to that list. And that's a list you own. And it may be that somebody thought they were interested, but it's really not a year out before they're actually going to make a decision on housing. And so if you can set up an email campaign to your own list, it's a great way a great low-cost way to bring in inquiries and hit people at the right time.
Great. I have a couple more quick questions. We have several here, and I apologize. We may not get to all of these, and we will definitely follow up with any of these questions that we didn't get to in a personal email to you. But somebody wanted to know about, are you finding Internet leads to be more educated? Is the sales cycle, decision-making time a little bit shorter? What are you finding statistically on those?
That's a good question. To be honest, I don't have real comparative data to say, internet leads versus, say, a referral or a word of mouth inquiry. But I do know that we've done some analysis on our own, the leads that we've sent and the leads that have turned into move-ins. And typically what we see is there certainly is a tail. You get the majority of the move-ins happen within the first 60 days, sometimes 90 days. But there is a tail of move-ins that come in after that. So that's part of the reason why it's important to keep touching people.
Gotcha. Well, great. Well, Chris, we are just about out of time. I'm going to have you advance to the next slide just so people know how to contact you directly if they have some additional questions that they'd like to follow up with you personally on, or you can send them through MatureMarketSales.com as well. But Chris, we really appreciate you being here today, and thank you for taking the time to provide us with some insights into Internet leads, because it is becoming a topic that's front and center with regards to driving traffic to our communities. And it really is demonstrating these days that if we're not online and if we don't have a good website and we're not doing some inbound marketing, we're not, out there contracting with some of these vendors, we're losing a big chunk of potential lead sources. And then ultimately, as you said, you've got to have the systems, a process in place, and you definitely have to be tracking the ROI. So you want to make sure that you're spending your time, money, and resources on things that do pay off for you. So.
That's right. Well, thank you, and thank you. I hope it's been helpful. Certainly, if you have any follow-up questions, you can send them to me directly. That's my email address and direct line. Or if you want to learn more about seniorhomes.com, certainly feel free to contact me as well.
Sounds great. Thank you, everybody, for joining us at Mature Market Sales Source. To view other upcoming webinars, go to our website at MatureMarketSales.com. And we also invite anybody who'd like to participate in our lead source survey. It is on our website under the toolbox. If you'd like to participate, we are actually offering complimentary access to the data once we have the results published. So if you'd like to have access to that, please feel free to participate. The more data we get, the better quality it is. So please join us. Thank you. We look forward to having everybody join us again on another Mature Market Sales Source webinar. Chris, have a wonderful day. Happy selling to all.